Yeah, let's talk about the end of the world, because that's always relevant. And
Yeah. I mean, I think the question, it could be also the title for the video, is what is a good end of the world?
right.
And I think if we can make a funny discussion, because I know your idea about that, because you talked about that the last time, and I can be like the devil's advocate. I don't have a strong idea about that, but I can pretend to have a strong idea, so we can do a discussion about that. And and it's funny because that there is no such thing as a good end of the world, but we were discussing about a good end of the war, right?
Right.
So and we can make I try to make a small list of the different end of the worlds that we find in science fiction and in movies. There are 3 or 4 kind,
Right.
and we can discuss about that
Yeah.
and make examples, and what you like and what you don't like. And I have a more, I live in Europe, and we are exposed to maybe stories, and especially movies and series, that are not necessarily the same as you watch in the States. So it may be interesting to see some. I think some movies are not distributed
I
in
think
the
that's,
US.
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
we can
Well,
talk about
I think nowadays most movies, if they're up on any system, eventually get to be on all systems. But I think, one of the issues about talking about the end of the world, not only is there's not a good way to end the world, there's not a best way to end the world, but if you look at science fiction, most of the so-called ends of the world aren't really the end of the world, or the end of even the human species on the world. So, for example, I reviewed the series The Last of Us, which is based on a game, which I never played. So I'm just judging this by the series. And in case anyone doesn't know what that story in the series is all about, it's about a fungus that attacks human beings. In fact, I entitled one of my reviews "The Fungus Among Us" because it rhymed. And it is true that and this as a biologist, fungi are much more difficult to treat than bacteria, and maybe even viruses. The fungi don't respond to antibiotics and things like that. So, they have a few things that they can use. But the point is, the reason why this is such a good post-apocalyptic story is not everyone dies. There's someone who has immunity, and we don't even know why, to the fungus. And so what you really have in this end of the world scenario is, it's not quite the end of the world. There are a few human beings who are like desperately hanging on. And of course, there are human beings who are bad actors. The same thing is like a microcosm of what our lives are today. And so the decent, the good human beings who are trying to find a solution, they have to worry about both the fungus and the bad human beings. And it's just it's done very, very well. It's a very interesting story. And the protagonist, the hero, is a girl, I guess in her early teens, like maybe
it. Yeah.
13, and it's done very well. Um, in terms of a true end of the earth, uh, or the end of human existence, I guess the comet stories, right? This comet is going to hit the earth, and then the only way we can survive is to get off the earth in a hurry. So that at least is a totally earth destroyed ending. So at least it's true to the phrase "the end," of the earth, the end of existence. But even there, if human beings were able to get off the world before the comet hits and go set up shop on some other planet around another star system, then then it's not really the end of human civilization either.
So
Um,
you like end of the world stories where the world doesn't really end,
yeah, that's right.
where
But
someone where someone will survive.
That's right.
You don't like the idea that everything disappears.
Right. Well, who does? Do you like that idea? I mean, what's
Well, you know, I mean, to me, a good end of the world story is has two features. It has to be plausible, and well, as a biologist, the fungus is you know, the Last of Us idea of the fungus is interesting because it's true that some fungi and even some bacteria make infected organism do behave in we can make a very interesting example like Ebola. Ebola is a virus, but people with Ebola, they at the very end of their dreadful and very horrific disease, when they are nearly at the end, they have convulsions. So basically, you have these people who are really sick and they are, you know, bleeding everywhere. So you see, you think, why? I mean, what is the evolutionary significance of a virus that makes you have a convulsion just before dying? The idea is that these people, when they have convulsion, they can spread the blood around and infect other people. You have bacteria that are, you know, we know that some bacteria can affect the behavior of some animals and even potentially people. So I like the idea of the you know, of the fungus. I don't want to do any you know, any spoiler here. It's just the beginning. I haven't seen the whole series, so it would be a spoiler for myself actually.
Yeah.
So I like that idea, and it's very plausible. It's not really. I don't really like the idea of a fungus that makes a pandemic, because the idea that the pandemic potentiality of fungi is actually not very high. It would be very unlikely that a fungus would cause a pandemic for many reasons, for many biological reasons. It's not as simple. It's a complicated organism. It's an eukaryotic organism, so it has many pieces inside that can be attacked, that can be broken, and so on. Whereas a virus is very simple, a bacteria are very simple, so there are few pieces you can attack. Okay, but the idea is interesting. However, the other characteristic that to me makes a proper end of the world is that well, it has to be plausible, and it has. Oh yeah, one thing that I like is that it's a warning. I mean, I like end of the world stories that warn us in some way. I mean, I was a little kid during the 80s, okay? And if I think about it, I have two end of the world stories in my mind that really terrified me. One was The Day After, the movie about the atomic bomb, which I saw in a incredibly crowded theater here in my town in Italy. And I don't know about the United States, but when the movie came here in Europe, people were really, it was kind of panic, okay? And I remember as a kid watching this movie and thinking, how stupid would it be, you know, to press that button, because the day after is really what happens after they launch the atomic bombs. And you know, this movie was about what happens to a few survivors around after the bomb. And the other was the BBC series Survivors. and I think that was a kind of virus eating humanity. And it was during the 70s. And I really like Survivors because it was a warning, and it was very plausible. You know, the British series in the 70s. I watched it again recently, and I think it's still worth watching. I don't know what you think, but it's still worth watching because it's very realistic. It's very plausible in the interaction between people and the importance of technology and so on.
Yes, I think they're very worth watching. And I have to say, apropos of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the idea of a nuclear global war has once again become not just science fiction, but in the real news. And I don't think Putin would be so crazy as to do something that would provoke a nuclear war. But on the other hand, I don't put anything past him. I think that certainly we here in the United States, and I'm sure over in Europe, unfortunately, got the wrong message when the Soviet Union fell apart. We thought basically, okay, the Cold War is over, mutually assured destruction is no longer the case. Certainly there are going to be tensions. We found out soon enough that terrorist attacks are still going to happen, but terrorist attacks don't destroy the world. But certainly with the invasion of Ukraine now going into its second year, we have to face seriously again the problem that you have these two superpowers, the US and Russia, and other countries have nuclear weapons too, China does, that something could happen where we could substantially destroy most, if not all, of human life and even this planet. By the way, in my opinion, the single best movie or television series on that theme, and the ones you mentioned are really good. I'll mention two of them. One of them is a television series. I think it's from the early 1980s, but I'm not sure. It could be the late 1970s. It's called Special Bulletin. And it was on, I think, NBC, one of our networks then. In those days, there were no cable, certainly no streaming. And basically sitting and watching the show, whatever was on, like from 8 to 9 o'clock, some, who knows, some, stupid sitcom. And then when that ends, a guy who was a real reporter gets on the air and says, well, we're interrupting our normal broadcasting this evening to give you a special bulletin. And what's the bulletin? There's a nuclear, attack going on, and it just takes off from there. And the realism of that was really effective. And I wasn't a kid in the 1980s. I was much younger, but I was really impressed by that. In a way, that was taking off from Orson Welles's famous War of the Worlds radio broadcast, where there was a brief advisory telling listeners, well, what you're going to hear is a science fiction story, blah, blah, blah. But once Wells started narrating, oh my God, they're falling from the skies, it became real. The other, though, I do have to mention, and it doesn't receive quite enough attention, Neville Shute wrote a novel called On the Beach, a really beautiful, heartbreaking novel about Australia awaiting this tide of radiation because there's been a nuclear war between the US and Russia, and Australia is like the last country who hasn't been engulfed by this radiation, and they're not going to make it. And they made a very good movie out of that as well, On the Beach. So that is a very good story. And while we're on the subject of that, and getting back to radio plays, in the 1950s, there was a radio play called Night of the Auk, I think. That's the title. And that was also a very, very poignant, emotional story about an astronaut who is like circling the Earth, and he's coming back to land and sees that there's not going to be much to land to, because while he was in space, a nuclear war broke out. So yeah, if we're talking about what the best ends of the worlds are in terms of a science fiction story that really delivers a punch. I would say by and large, these nuclear annihilation stories pack more of a wallop and have endured better than some of the pandemic stories as well. The problem with the pandemic stories, and Dustin Hoffman was in one, I think it was called Outbreak. That was about 10.
Yeah, Outbreak. Yeah.
They're pretty good, but and again, you as a biologist would know this better than I, and I think you're even saying this about fungi. That's not realistic. The sense I have, not as a biologist, is that the science in those movies is not quite accurate, even when they're dealing with bacteria and viruses. They always make certain assumptions which probably wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I think there's a range. I mean, they range from ridiculous, really ridiculous, like Outbreak was kind of ridiculous, and fairly accurate, like Contagion. The other movie, which was more recent, was it the director? I don't remember the name, but it's a famous one. Contagion.
Maybe. Was it Brian De Palma? No.
No. Well, I will look it up, but yeah, it's Contagion was a very, very, I mean, quite an accurate movie, and about also, in terms of how you have the first cases, and then how the contagion spreads, and what happens after all the measures that are taken, and also about this misinformation, because you have this character of the journalist that is spreading misinformation because he wants to become famous and so on. So I think it had all the ingredients that we have seen actually during the real pandemic, and it was a few years before actually. So I think that was accurate, and it also depends on the kind of guys they hire as a consultants, because there they hired a real scientist as a consultant, a real, I think it was a virologist or something like that. So it was quite accurate. But I think an interesting thing talking about pandemic movies is the idea that I try to make a list, and we can make a game afterwards about what the different kind of way that the work can hand. One way I listed is, of course, the pandemic, but there's a kind of overlap between the pandemic and the zombie, because usually the zombie comes after because of a pandemic. No, I don't see how the and I was always fascinated by the amount of zombie stories, movies and series that came out recently. And perhaps it's interesting because you mentioned earlier all these stories about the nuclear holocaust during the 50s and up to the 70s and 80s. And then we almost forgot about that. I don't remember many stories, movies about that during the 90s and and more recently. Maybe they will come now, but there was an incredible number of stories about zombies. Do you have an idea? I mean, what's your idea about this pandemic of zombie stories in the modern literature and modern movies? Why is that? Why contemporary people, they like zombie stories so much?
I don't know. You're asking the wrong person, because in general, I don't particularly like zombie stories.
Mm.
I, My best guess as to why they're so popular, there's an erotic, almost sexual aspect to it, almost a necrophilia in these zombie stories. So for example, in The Walking Dead, and that's based on a comic book, but I've never read a single issue of the comic book. I watched about 5 or 6 years of the series, and then I couldn't take it anymore. But in the television series, at least, and I guess this was in the comic book also, the lead character's wife is bitten, and so she becomes a zombie, and they spend a lot of time, how much longer can he hold her? Make love to her. I mean, and so these two things, it's like almost the love of the dead are woven together. In a way, Sigmund Freud would be delighted with it, because he always said that the two main driving forces in human life are libido, love, and thanatos, death or desire to avoid death. And I think that the zombie
Mm.
movies show that.
So you
But
think it's Eros and Thanatos, something like that?
yes, that's right.
Mm.
Yes,
That's
exactly
interesting.
right. Right, Eros, but Freud like talking about libido, the life force, the loving force, the force to reproduce. Um, and of course, ironically, in a biological sense, what these horrendous viruses and fungi are doing, they're trying to reproduce also. So it's really their libido versus our libido, which results in our death. Um, but I mean, look, in addition to that, I think as far as movies are concerned, there are some people, not me, but there are some people who, I don't know, get a kick out of seeing these like horrendously ravaged human beings, falling apart, their faces eaten up by God
Mm.
knows what. And it's the question of, the uncanny valley. The least effective ones are the ones which just make them look like complete insane monsters. The most effective ones allow us to see the humanity in them, even though they're zombies, and that makes it, all the worse. But I assume in Europe as well. I mean, here in the United States, The Walking Dead was I think it just ended this past year on the AMC. That's a cable network. It was enormously successful, and there were a couple of spin-off series. Fear the Walking Dead, I think, is still continuing, sort of a prequel. And again, as I may have said to you in another conversation, I'm very Cartesian, as in Descartes. I think, therefore, I am. The way I look at the world, what feels right to me is the way I think the world is and should be, even though it's just my subjective view. But I would say objectively, I think these zombie movies are not as good as the end of the world nuclear war movies, not as good as the comet hits the earth movies, and not even as good. And you're right, there is a connection between the pandemic and the zombies. I usually prefer pandemic stories in which
Mm.
the end of the human being is just they're dead, not that they come back and start eating other people. To me, that puts in a nauseating, aspect into it.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of zombie movies either. I find it almost ridiculous. I mean, it's fantasy, okay, that it's horror and so on. So, but the link with the I mean, when you do the idea from the as I understand, zombie comes from the like the voodoo or something. So it's a kind of spiritual and very very there is nothing scientific in that. It's just a belief that some people have actually of black magic and so on. So I think that the name itself comes from there. And then the literature try to give it a scientific explanation, and so here's the link with the viruses or anything that can explain that. It's usually a bug, a virus, or a fungus, or whatever, which is you know, the thing that I really find ridiculous in that, I don't discuss the idea that you can become a zombie after being infected. I don't believe that, but you know, so what? The timing, because you see these people getting infected, and then they become a zombie after 10 minutes, which this is biologically totally impossible. So please, I mean, if a writer of zombie stories is listening, is watching us, please make a story where you get infected and then you become a zombie after 20 days or 15 days. That would be that would be biologically better, because there is no way of, you know, of taking a body, an organism, and transforming that in so quickly. I mean, not in this world. Then if you can think of a alien biologist, but then it becomes another kind of movies. Oh, before I forget, I would like to mention a movie that perhaps didn't came out in the United States because it was a very indie movie here in Europe. It's an Irish movie. It's called The Cured. The Cured. And it's very, I think it's from 2018, or I would check it out. What I really like, I don't like zombie movies, but that was special because the story is about what happens after the zombie movie ends. So usually you have the zombie story, and then the world doesn't end as you like, Paul. You don't like, so everything. So someone or something solves the problem. There is a cure, and but nobody nobody as far as I know, nobody ever asked what happens then. So your neighbor has eaten your wife, and then everybody is cured. So what you do, you say hello in the morning on your driveway. So this movie, I think it's fantastic because it's a movie about the cured. So the idea is that there was a zombie apocalypse. It has ended. They found a cure. So basically you have these people who are cured. They were zombies, so they killed the people. They have eaten people, and now they have to live with the other people. And I think it's fantastic. It's a fantastic story. I don't want to spoil that, but
Yeah.
I know the high concept is fantastic. So I recommend if you find it somewhere. And a little movie, not very famous, but
Well, that sounds
the
like
type of movie I like.
yeah. Well, I like that it has an optimistic ending, but I think your point is very well taken. Like, if somebody has eaten your wife and then they're cured, what are you going to do after they're cured? Say, hey, how you doing? You have a
I'm
good.
sorry, I ate your wife, but it wasn't my fault. I was infected, you
Yeah.
know.
I mean, I want to get back though to a point that you made about the speed at which someone becomes a zombie. Now, at least in The Walking Dead, it did take a little time, and in the better zombie movies, they also do work in the possibility that someone has immunity for whatever reason, so they're waiting for that person to turn. But one of the main things in these zombie movies, if you're convinced that the person is irrevocably on the path to becoming a zombie. And to give The Walking Dead credit, it usually took, I think, a couple of weeks actually.
Mm.
Then you have
Okay.
to like, yeah, how long are you going to wait before you put them out of their misery? Because what happens is if you wait too long, then this loving person who's a member of your family suddenly goes ballistic and starts trying to kill you and eat you. The ridiculous thing about this, though, if you think about it, why would a zombie want to eat a human being anyway? I mean, what? That's the only kind of food they can eat. And occasionally they go into like the zombie grabs a desperate zombie grabs a rabbit or a dog and then just eats them completely rather than just biting them. The other thing about how long it takes is I think The Walking Dead did this and a couple other zombie stories do it too. Let's say somebody is bitten in the arm if you have like a medical person, like with any knowledge nearby, that it's almost always a possibility. If you amputate that arm right away, you may save the person. So that but if you wait too long, don't even talk about it, then it goes too late. And if you're bitten in the neck, of course, then it's hopeless, because what are you gonna do? You can't amputate the head, because then the person would be dead.
Yeah, there's a movie where they do that. The Z, what's the
World War
uh,
Z or something.
well, yeah. What was that? You have the Israeli soldier, the
Yeah,
woman who
yeah,
gets beaten, and she cuts her arm. I
that's right.
remember that, and I remember thinking, yeah, that yeah, that was clever. Yeah,
Right, that
that would I would do that.
that could definitely work. Um,
It's incredible that they just think it only in this movie, because it's it it
yeah,
seems so logical.
absolutely. Another thing I don't like about zombie movies, first of all, who likes going into a hospital in any case? But most of these zombie stories begin in hospitals, because at the
Mm.
very beginning, nobody knows, that this virus or whatever it is going to turn a person into a zombie. So the person is sick, they're not getting any better. They're brought into a hospital. Next thing that happens, the person gets out of bed as a zombie, eats the doctors and eats other patients and goes crazy, and then goes out in the street. If you're supposed to go into a hospital in reality, that's like the last movie you should see, because being in a hospital is bad enough. Who wants to be in a hospital, especially overnight? You have somebody next door who's snoring, whatever. That's bad enough. But if you at all associate going into a hospital with the possibility you might be attacked by a zombie, and I hate to say it, in a way, this just occurred to me. This is like one of the tragedies of the COVID pandemic, that people, in fact, stopped going to hospitals for just elective surgery. In fact, hospitals stopped doing elective surgery, and they do PCR tests now and so on. But who wants to go into a hospital when there's a pandemic of a disease? Not that turns you into a zombie, that's science fiction, but the reality that it could kill you.
Yeah, maybe one reason we people like so much zombie movies these days is that they are really a metaphor of it's kind of a medical metaphor. I see it as a medical metaphor about even about also about the people getting older. If you think of dementia, Alzheimer, and so on, in some way, I mean, everybody has has had someone in the family affected by dementia, and in some way, uh, it's like becoming a zombie, not in the sense of harming other people, but in the transformation, the fact that you become someone else. And I think that and in some way we are, our society is getting older and older, and maybe and much more medicalized. So this is my personal interpretation. Perhaps this is one reason why this story resonates so much today with people, because it's in some way we see our destiny in some way of becoming of our mind. We have a body that is deteriorating and a mind that is changing inside us, and yeah, that's one. If you ask me what is the biggest metaphor of the zombie for me is it's aging, and the fact that we will become older and older. But maybe it's another explanation.
Well, that's an interesting thought. By the way, I just want to work in here something that also has to do with bacteria, but is also a possible end of the world, but it has a happy ending. And I wish there were more of these kinds of science fiction stories. And what I'm talking about is one of H.G. Wells's, one of his many great path-breaking works, War of the Worlds, where we're invaded, by Martians, and it doesn't really matter whether they're Martians or Alpha Centaurians, who cares where they come from, and they have a superior technology, because again, this was written in the 1890s. We didn't even have airplanes then, really, flying around. So any travel across from one planet to another was a much more advanced technology. They're wiping us out, and it looks hopeless for us. And sorry to give away the ending, but anyone who's watching this who hasn't read War of the Worlds, okay, don't listen to what I'm going to say. Uh,
But it's
but
not new. Come on, it's
I
not
know
new.
it's like, oh, but basically, the human beings are saved by some hopeful bacteria on Earth that we're immune to already, but the alien invaders are not, and they die with that. So again, H.G. Wells, still, in my opinion, after all these years, really, really a brilliant, path-breaking science fiction writer and thinker. But so that was the ending of War of the Worlds. There are very
Yeah,
few.
I love that. Paul, you read my mind, because this is one of the best biological ending that I can imagine. And when I read the novel, but also Spielberg in the movie, I'm gonna spoil that because I like too much. And if you don't know the story of that novel, you're really, I can
You,
do nothing about, can't do anything about it.
you don't deserve to even watch us or listen to us if you don't know the story of the
Yeah,
novel.
that just go away. But yeah, I remember distinctively the words at the end of the movie. I don't know if are the same from the novel, but we, in billions of years, we die by billions, and we deserve to be on this earth.
That's
We
right.
deserve, we earn the right to be on this earth, and that is one word: evolution. So it's perfectly plausible, and it's perfectly true that if an alien organism came on Earth, and they had our same biology, which is not taken from granted, but if they had the same biology that we have, like, let's imagine that the human race had this, or not the human race, but evolution, at the beginning of evolution of life on Earth, we had someone taking the life on Earth and bringing it to another planet, or that life on Earth came from another planet. So we have a common biology, which we have carbon biology, we have the same element, we have the same DNA, we use DNA or RNA and so on. So any organism going from one planet to another, it will be probably wiped out by a pathogen, or because this is how evolution works. It's true that the only thing that I would say, well, maybe it's not really true, is that pathogen co-evolve with their host. So if you have someone coming from a very different type of life coming from another planet, I'm not so sure that would be attacked by a bacteria or by a virus, because they wouldn't have the keys to enter their cells and so on. But yeah, that ending, I think it's great, because also it gives credit to us and to every organism that lived on Earth of the effort that we have done. We really earned the right to be there, because we evolved, and we are survivals. most of the species, 99.9% of the species that lived on Earth are extinct.
That's right.
So we are survivors, and we really earn the right to be there.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, I often say you and I and everyone alive today, in addition to having survived COVID so far, but we are the descendants of people who survived the Black Plague, the bubonic plague. I mean, these were some really serious plagues, which, as you know better than I, as a biologist, wiped out as much as 3/5 of some of populations in some cities in some areas. Imagine that, 3 out of every 5 people who died when there was, when that plague took over. So whatever is in our DNA, we're here today because we have descended from people who survived that. So,
Yeah,
we
of
certainly did it
course.
the hard way.
But however, I don't imagine and I don't see an advanced civilization, alien civilization, going to another planet and not taking precautions. So that is the fault of the story. Come on, they come with these huge machines and they invade another planet. So they have clearly they have an advanced technology, and they didn't think about biosecurity. And in terms of biosecurity, if you look at with the eyes of a biologist, 90% of movies you see are just crap. I will mention the worst to me, which is Alien Covenant, where they have this, I think it's Alien Covenant, one of the last two aliens, which I didn't like, but Alien Covenant maybe was the worst. And if I remember well, there is a break, there's something like a pathogen, a virus, or something like an alien, the alien, alien, because of a breach in biosecurity, and if you look at how the laboratory is made and the spaces are organized, nobody now and in the future would ever think of doing that. So, and
I was just going to throw in the all-time worst movie. A lot of people loved it. It was an idiotic piece of garbage. Don't Look Up. It was
I knew you would say
I,
that.
I don't even want to talk about it. It was such a piece of garbage. I mean, okay, it was worth like maybe one skit on Saturday Night Live or something. There was a little bit of humor there. But, anyway, so talking about worst movies. But I do want to say the one thing, about when the interstellar or even from our own solar system invaders be taking precautions. I had two thoughts about that. One, when you said taking precautions, they should certainly have to take precautions if they're trying to have sex with any human being. So that puts like taking precautions into a new a whole different realm. But the other point, and this is an important point from history, and I'm sure you probably know this, I think his name, there was an historian by the name of William McNeill. And I think for those who want to look this up, I think it's capital M, small c, capital Neill, something like that, William McNeill. Anyway, he wrote a bunch of books. One of them was called Plagues and Peoples. And one of the points that he made in his work is how disease played a decisive role in human history. And so the reason that Hannibal and his Carthaginians lost the the 3 Punic Wars with Rome, his last great invasion, basically the Carthaginian troops were decimated when they were trying to come to Italy because they were attacked by some kind of virus there, which probably the Italians were immune to because they had had the virus for a while. So I mean, that can be a pretty serious thing. And one thing we haven't talked about is germ warfare. Obviously, this is still a possibility. And to loop this back to COVID, this still hasn't been resolved. You may have heard recently our own FBI here in the United States has now taken the position that they can't rule out that the virus did begin in the Wuhan labs.
Yeah, it's the lab leak hypothesis. Well, we can make a full episode about that because
Yes.
I've been following that closely. But well, nobody can rule out anything 100%. But many of the stories that I see in the press coming out are not really accurate. So I think that it would deserve a full discussion. But yeah, I mean, diseases and wars and history there are plenty of examples of, like you mentioned, the during the Romans Empire, but even more recently during World War I and World War II. There is a during World War One, it seems that more people died of diseases than of from bullets or shrapnels and so on. And if you think of people, in very poor hygienic conditions in a stranger country there was no antibiotics. There were no antibiotics during the World War One. So diseases have changed. During Napoleonic Wars, the diseases have changed the course of the wars. So it's there is this very interesting, interlink between diseases and the history. If it wasn't for certain bugs, history would have been very different, and even literature would be very different. We have in Italy, I mean, not only in Italy, I hope, but the Decameron is a story which is from from the we studied it at school. Boccaccio, the Decameron, is a story about the pandemic, because the idea is that these stories it's a story about a group of people that are isolated during a plague in Italy, and so they are isolated in the country, and so to make their time more agreeable, to kill their time, they tell 10 stories about, and so the 10 stories become the Decameron. Or if you think of many stories in the literature, they are connected with the epidemics in some way. So yeah, I think it's normal, because we as humans have lived with epidemics and for basically all our history, and we forgot about that. So we thought this wasn't in our list of maybe in science fiction, but in reality we didn't think about that. And now we have a reminder that sadly pandemics are there to stay, and we have to face them. So,
Yeah,
but tell me, why you didn't like the
don't look up.
Don't Look Up?
Yeah. Okay, I'll just give you like one example. At the very end of the movie, I actually thought one of the few good things in the movie is, okay, the ship takes off and they get to another planet. And you see them walking on the planet. Meryl Streep is playing the American president. And after this whole movie, they get to another planet. Meryl Streep, here I am, I'm laughing, but it's so bad. That's why I'm laughing. They're walking on this other planet, and I don't know, some animal swoops down and it bites her head off. I mean, it is so stupid. I mean, I guess I'm laughing, so maybe that proves that some people do enjoy it. But I guess what bothered me about it is, look, it's a very serious issue that people in the United States, at least, mainly Republicans, what else is new, are ignoring climate change and keep putting obstacles in its way, and nothing ever convinces them, and so on. And I think that is something that's ripe for satire. But this movie was so stupid. It was so lowball in its in what it gave us to laugh at. It had a few good elements that it basically distracted from that more serious effort. And I'll put it this way: satire has a long tradition. Jonathan Swift dealt in satire. Even Mark Twain dealt in satire. This movie, I know Jonathan Swift, I know Mark Twain, and I'll say to the people who made this movie, you ain't no Mark Twain or Jonathan. So,
So not the proper end of the world according to Paul Levinson, ladies and gentlemen.
that's right.
Well, it's grotesque. I watched the movie. It's grotesque, but on in some way, I mean, if you think of, I mean, if an asteroid impacts the Earth, that's a plausible way that's a plausible end of the world, and the type of end of the world you don't like, Paul, because nobody basically, it's unlikely that anybody would survive, because if a big asteroid takes the Earth, it's just very difficult for people, for humanity, maybe other species, but humanity would be unlikely to survive. So so according to my own rule, it's plausible. So it's a check, but it's a very, of course, it's a very grotesque story. But for example, I see some elements that are more realistic than I thought, like the behavior of the scientist, DiCaprio, who, you know, at the beginning he tries to explain the complexity of the topic, and then he's completely taken into the media whirlpool and forgets everything, and he becomes famous, and he just become a TV guy like anyone else, and he's not the scientist anymore. It's the TV guy who just try to simplify things until he doesn't even know what he's saying. And it's grotesque, but I have seen many of these scientists during the pandemic, at least here. They become famous. They go to the television, they go on TV, and they become like a TV host, TV guest, and they just say, they just become the entertainment guy. So I found that very illuminating. But yeah, it's a story where the art disappears. There's no happy ending. There's no survival. So,
but actually, I don't know. I'm sure it's pretty much the same all over the place. It seems to me that if you're talking about, let's call them these television scientists, whether it's Carl Sagan, or Anthony Fauci, who certainly spent a lot of time on television, they didn't lose their minds. They weren't swept up in the media hype. They continued to say what they thought was right. So that's why I thought, to some extent, even the satire was misplaced. Certainly the media people don't get it. As a matter of fact, the media critique was one of the only, I thought, valuable, worthwhile things in the satire. But I don't know any scientists who basically started out trying to explain things correctly and then got swept up in the hype, and they were so in love with their own fame.
Well, I know a few ones here. Yeah. Maybe not in the United States. America has maybe a different media system, more selective in some way. Here, especially in Italy, the programs are only talk show. People discuss about on TV about politics. It's a talk show. About the science, it's a talk show. Everything is a talk show, in the bad sense. It's an entertainment format, not an information format. So and I wouldn't say any name, but I can think, and I think many people here in Italy and in Europe can think of scientists in their respective countries that are somewhat similar to what DiCaprio did. Then, of course, there are scientists like Fauci, and I think Fauci did a huge service to the United States and to to the world in general, because he kept his spine. And when he was in front of the president of the United States, who was basically telling people to drink chlorine, and every time he had to say, okay, that's not really true, guys. And he was facing losing his job basically every day. Then maybe because of his competence, because it would be it would be too difficult to fire them in that precise moment. I don't know. Maybe you have more information than me, but he stayed at his place. Now the president is not there, the same, and he's still there. So he won basically. Okay. In the fight. But yeah, we didn't see as many Fauci here as you had in the United States, unfortunately.
That's interesting.
But we don't. But to our credit, we didn't have, or to their credit, we didn't have a president who was drinking chloride.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, there are a few other characters like Bolsonaro in Brazil. He was voted out of office. There were a few lunatics, probably some of them are still in office, but right. I mean, the juxtaposition, the coincidence of Trump being in office when the pandemic hit was one of the most unfortunate things in history, because even with Fauci's advice, Trump did an enormous amount of damage with his nonsense, especially at the beginning. Although one of the only things that I would give Trump credit for is he did get behind this super rapid development of the vaccines, of the mRNA vaccines, and they did a lot of good. By the way, before we conclude our discussion, I do want to give a shout out to a new series. I'm not sure if it's available yet in Europe or the rest of the world. It's called The Ark, as in Noah's Ark, ARK, and it's on here in the United States. It's a production of the Sci-Fi Channel, which is a cable channel, but it's streaming as well. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is it's not 100% clear why Earth is ending, why human beings can't live here anymore. I think they don't deal with that all that much. It's some kind of environmental pollution, which is like destroying the earth, but slowly. And so what made me think of it is Don't Look Up. They build a starship to go to Proxima B, traveling, very slowly, nowhere near the speed of light. And Dean Devlin is one of the people behind it. He's done a bunch of good things like Stargate and other shows. And it starts off being a little superficial, but I have to say it does a pretty good job with and an increasingly good job with every episode. And I'm especially fond of it because I don't know if you know this, My second novel, which a lot of people consider my worst novel, but as I always point out, I don't have a worst novel. I don't know what you're talking about. But my second novel is called Borrowed Tides, and it's about the first starship to the Alpha Centauri system. And even back then, I knew about Proxima Centauri, like that third star. And so the planet that they're going to is circling around Proxima Centauri, and that's where this starship in the ark is headed. So it's an end of the world story, but with a happy ending, at least because for these human beings who are on board this ship.
And do you have, Paul, do you have a what if you had to name your favorite end of the world story, what would it be? Do you have one? If the world ended and you could save only one end of the world story, what would it be?
Well, believe it or not, I mentioned it before, this television series, Special Bulletin, again, it was right up there, not H.G. Wells, Orson Welles. They spelt their name slightly differently. Orson Welles is Wells. H.G. Wells was Wells, no E before the S at the end. Um, and I assume it's available someplace. The problem is, if you see it now, it can't have the same effect as when we're watching television here. Just imagine we're sitting on our couches relaxing, and a real reporter comes on and says, we interrupt our regular program for this special bulletin. And, it's a pretty, it's really the most effective end of the world I've seen, because it was so realistic. It took advantage of
So people at the time did believe that it was like a
yes and no. I mean,
like Orson Welles, or
yeah, at the very beginning, people might have believed it, but then, if you knew anything about television, you saw like some actors and actresses in there. In other words, the reporter was real, but everybody else were actors and actresses. So, and it's possible that there was some kind of, I'm trying to think, there wasn't any internet back then. So there might have been some kind of report, like, the New York Times had a small story. They were asked to keep it quiet, that there's going to be this nuclear attack movie, but it's not really happening. So I think some people did know it. And I think some people, though, did get upset about it, though, in the same way that the people back in the 1930s got upset with Orson Welles's wonderful story, which of course is based on H.G. Wells's story. Again, another alien invasion. Yeah.
That maybe the next one would be on Twitter, not on television. Well, I'm not sure Twitter will survive that much, but well, maybe that will be for another for another video. Well, I think my favorite end of the world is The Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy, because it's just 2 seconds. It's fast and painless. The wagons come. They just put a collimator on the earth, and they zap it, and it disappears. So, and I tend to imagine that if an alien civilization, very advanced and very powerful, very strong, dominating the galaxy, would want to wipe the Earth, they I mean they wouldn't land on the Earth and being risking of being infected and die and so on, but they would just point a gun or something from outer space and just vaporize the Earth in 2 seconds. So it's very sad for us, because in how long did it take in the story? Like 1 second or something. So the Earth disappears immediately, but there are survivors. There is one survivor, right? So
Like the person's telling the story.
So it's good for you as well.
That's right. Exactly right. Yeah. Well, look, as you're saying this, about that, and I actually agree with you logically. That probably is the
Oh,
worst.
sorry, 2 survivors actually.
Right. The it sort of makes me think what that kind of story brings us in touch with is that we truly don't understand on a scientific level. And yeah, there are spiritual explanations, but there's no evidence for spiritual explanations. It's just a question of faith. But on a scientific level, we still don't yet fully understand how the universe itself came into being. The Big Bang Theory, okay, uh, but what caused the Big Bang to happen? There had to be something. It didn't just emerge out of nothing. And the truth is, we don't even yet and here again, this is in your bailiwick, we don't even fully yet understand how our kind of intelligent life emerged on Earth. We can see, that, dolphins and chimpanzees and orangutans, and orangutans and chimpanzees, they have over 98%, as you well know, DNA similar to ours, but somehow in this little bit extra DNA, you and I are now talking to each other in two different continents. And, we don't really understand how that, happened. And so, therefore, it's not surprising that we have no idea how it's going to end either. And the idea that suddenly, boom, somebody can just snap a finger and we just all go out of existence, that kind of thing is impossible to refute because we don't know how it happened in the first place. If, for example, we want to be religiously inclined and say, well, no, that would never happen because God created us, God brought us into being, and God is not an evil being. If you read the book of Job, sometimes God puts terrible obstacles in individuals' paths to sort of test their faith and the depth of their understanding. But we don't think that religions don't think that God, him, her itself is a malevolent entity. Therefore, if we believe in that as a question of faith, then it's not going to happen. God wouldn't allow it to happen, that someone can come in, Earth no longer exists, everyone's wiped out. But I tend to be agnostic myself because I don't understand, how the universe emerged. Maybe the religions are right. All that I know is it's beyond my understanding. And so that's why those endings, in a scientific way, they could certainly happen. But in a deeper sense, it's almost impossible to imagine them happening.
Yeah, I think we have we refuse that idea, and also maybe it makes the narrative more difficult. I mean, an exploding Earth with all these people inside all at once, you have to invent a very different narrative from the classical one, because the narrative, and this is, I think this is, I always, try to, I'm puzzled about that. I get crazy about that. The idea that you have these end of the world stories. So basically, literally, every human being is dying, and you have billions of people dying. The Earth is going to disappear. So that the classical, high concept of by definition of an end of the world movie. But the narrative, and we get passionate, we get captivated by the story of the guy searching the pregnant wife on the other part of the country. Because if you think about it, there's always this, there are cliches in the end of the war stories. So you have the guy or the family trying to save their children, or the guy looking the father, the wife, the mother. So if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense to me, because you have the world is disappearing. Why should I bother about the what happens to this family or to this guy while everybody else is dying, literally? And I think it's a powerful example of how the narrative works, because you don't think about the bigger picture, but we are all become affected by the story of these characters, and we love this character, and we want them to live. So at the end, many stories, they're just at the end of this, maybe the world hasn't ended, but usually billions of people have died, right? Entire cities have been destroyed, countries and so on. But we are happy at the end because these guys, the family has found their children. I mean, there's nothing to be happy about that, right?
But
So that's narrative, isn't it narrative?
yeah, well, a long time ago, somebody told me, just in terms of some advice when you're writing a science fiction story, especially if you want it made into a movie or a television series, don't just show the big picture. Show how it affects like just a few people, because that's what people can understand and identify with. But you're completely right. That's a very illogical thing. How can someone, yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is, if somebody finds, a couple are reunited across a continent where there's death and rubble and ruin all over, okay, I'm glad for them. I'm glad they're happy, but then it's going to be tough for them to last too long, if everybody else and everything else is in ruins.
Yeah, we
Anyway,
never think about what happens after. I mean, after the end of the world. I mean, you have the end of the world, but the end of the world has an end, an happy ending.
that's
And we
right.
never think about what happens after the happy ending of the end of the world.
No, that's right. Usually, by the way, and there are a couple of, more than a couple of examples. What often happens, there was something called, I think, Revolution. That there was a TV series on NBC a few years ago, and it starts out with like a band of people who survived some kind of Holocaust here in the United States. I can't even remember what it was, whether it was nuclear war or climate change or whatever. And they're struggling, and but before too long, they find out there's another group of people who survived, and there's yet another group of people. So they sort of, that's how the couple, the few people who managed to survive, that's how they can plausibly look forward to at least a semi-normal life, because there's a lot more left than just them. By the way, one last point, an episode of The Twilight Zone, which I'm not sure what it's entitled, may have been entitled All the Time in the World, another post-nuclear war. And there's a guy who's like a bookworm, and he just loves reading books. He doesn't care that everyone is destroyed. So I think this last scene takes place in New York City, next to the New York Public Library. New York City is destroyed in this nuclear war. And the guy is not unhappy because he's going up to the library. But I can't remember what happens. He trips or something, and his glasses fall down and break. It's like 1,000 pieces, and the guy can't read the books, and that's the end of the story.
And that's a good story, I think.
Yeah.
Because what I mean, you are happy to be alone and you can take the book and not return the book, but then you need someone to fix your glasses.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, nice, good story. Yeah.
All right.
You spoiled it, but it
I
was
know.
good.
I'm sorry. See it anyway. You'll like it. It's a great story. Most of the Twilight Zones are great stories. This was a great conversation. We'll have another conversation like this soon, and I'm looking forward
Hopefully.
to it. Yeah, and actually, we already even identified a few things that we could talk about. We should definitely have a talk about the pandemic, because it's still, the obviously virus has not disappeared. There's still questions in where it and how it emerged, and what can we do to prevent it from emerging again, and all those things. So great talking to Sergei. We'll talk again soon.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.